Today we're going to have a little talk about self-care versus community care. This was actually a request in a comment. I mentioned this briefly and someone asked if I could expand on it a little bit, which I'm more than happy to do. To start out, I just want to kind of frame what these two are and then like the context in which I first heard about them and how I kind of think of the two. So self-care is all over the place. I mean, I think you open up any feminist blog, any like women's magazine, like it's in a lot of places. I think I started hearing about self-care though, particularly around the 2008 recession. I remember that there were a lot of like articles starting to pop up I think in response to some of these like really stupid pieces about millennials and how like millennials are depending on their parents and aren't able to get a job, which like it's a giant recession, people. But there were a lot of sort of poverty shaming articles that came up around that time, which is alongside like poor and broke are not the same thing. And I think there was a lot of talking about being broke or unemployed, but there were also I noticed like definitely a fair number of kind of bootstrappy capitalist like poverty shaming articles that were all like, oh, don't drink your Starbucks or whatever. And so I think I started to see a lot of people talking about self-care in response to that. The idea that even if you are broke or poor, that you still deserve nice things, that you deserve to take care of yourself in whatever way that looks like for you, that we can't judge others based on what we know of their lives and say, oh, like this is a frivolous thing, that even people who have trouble meeting their basic needs, that doesn't mean that you don't deserve things that are beautiful, things that are pleasurable, things that are nice. And so that was initially the context in which I started hearing a lot about self-care. I think some of the positive things about this kind of self-care movement are that whole idea of deserving, I think is really important because our culture, capitalist culture, wants to push against that. So capitalist culture wants to say that you only deserve things if you put something in, that you can only earn things, that nothing is innate. Whereas if you believe in human rights, you know that we do all deserve things based on our humanity, and we may not always get everything we deserve, but the idea that taking care of ourselves is something we should give ourselves permission to do, I think is a really positive strain. And the connection between self-care and self-love is really good. I know a lot of people will talk about self-care will include things like exercises to be comfortable and loving around your body, around your emotions. They can really vary a lot. I mean, I think because the self-care discussion has been going for quite a while, there are certainly people, I think, who make fun of it, of being like just baths and facials, although like I'm not gonna knock a bath or a facial. I mean, I think the cool thing about self-care is it's really about what you need. And so like what is caring to you at a particular time might be to have a long soak and put some candles on, or it might be something that's like deeper or more substantive, or it might be playing video games for a while. Like I think everybody's got different self-care needs. Then community care, I mean, is a thing in and of itself. It's not just a response to self-care, but I think I started reading more and more around community care in response to the self-care movement. And I actually started thinking about this idea of communities of care. I started talking about around the 2012 FemCon, I think was the first group like this I was in, but I went to a few conferences in a row where I was in a group of femmes and women with disabilities and talking about the kinds of creative ways people had gotten their needs met by working with others in community. And I started thinking more and more about like smaller communities designed for mutual care within this larger system where the government with a larger society doesn't provide. So like how can we exchange skills and services and things we can do, because often when you get together with other people with disabilities, you realize that like some of the needs they have you could actually meet, some of the needs you have they could actually meet. And so that I think was really interesting to me and remains interesting to me, although I have a lot of questions on how we can set things like that up, being a community that by definition has limited spoons. But as I was thinking more and more about that, I also started reading a lot of articles about community care as an alternative to self-care, and mostly along two different strains. And so one would be particularly written by women and femmes of color, indigenous women and femmes, and then another by women and femmes with disabilities. And of course there's crossover between the two, so sometimes both. So one critique is the sort of whiteness or global north or capitalist viewpoint that self-care can become about, it can become oddly part of the whole bootstrapping narrative. So it can be a response to it in saying we don't have to earn things in order to deserve them, but it also can kind of run alongside it and even like align with the capitalist point of view by saying that the individual has to meet all the needs. So if the self is the one providing the care, the idea that you only deserve self-care if you could afford it, if you are able to provide it, that it's all about what an individual can do, and that if you can't do it yourself, then you don't deserve it. So if self-care starts to like move in that direction, then I think it can be really toxic and harmful. And so the idea there is that community care is a better model, because it comes from more of a global south, or more of a women and femmes of color perspective, more of a communal model where people take care of each other and nobody is expected to be able to do everything on their own, including taking care of themselves. It's kind of it takes a village model, except going beyond children, thinking about all members of the community, and the idea that a community should care for its elders, should care for its sick, its disabled. There's also a strain in this of, if we tend to demand the most emotional labor from women and femmes of color, and so if in a society where that's the case, like, why should those same people be the ones providing all the care? And that's an important question to ask. Also around disability, like, not everyone is necessarily able to provide self-care. So if the things that you need to be cared for you can't physically do yourself, or you don't have the energy or the emotions or other resources to do, then the self-care model doesn't work as well. If you don't have financial access to what you need, it doesn't work as well. So there are definitely critiques there where a community model allows, it's not a one-to-one transaction, but it allows everyone to pool the resources that they might have and to provide in the ways they can provide, and to receive in the ways they can receive. And even if what you can provide, is relatively little, like, it's an anti-capitalist model where we're not scoring. And so the idea is that no one should feel guilty about what they can put in, that the community as a whole is abundant and can provide for itself. And I think that there are also like things that are challenging about that system. I mean, I think community care is a great idea, but it does assume that you have a community. For people who are particularly isolated, for people with social anxiety, for people who just don't have a lot of their people, for folks who live in areas where they're extremely discriminated against and others don't share their identity, then it might not be possible to have a community care model. I think for myself that I really like the community care model in theory, and I think it works really well in some communities, but I often go more towards self-care because that's what I'm able to provide for my needs. So like, I would say that neither of these models is better or best, that both of them provide important critiques both of each other and of a model and of capitalism, a model where there is no care and care is not important. So I think they're both awesome in the sense that they prioritize care and invite us to think about what care means to us and how we need to be taken care of and how we can care for ourselves and others. And I think that the self-care side, in that it is about everyone deserving care and about self-love, is really positive. And I think at the same time it's important not to assume that the self-care model meets all needs, and to look at community care and particularly how it serves specific groups of people, in some instances better than the self-care model. So I think a blended model of both is really what we should strive for, and most importantly valuing care in general, which is a step that I don't think we've yet taken as a society. So I'd love to know what you think about self-care and community care. Please feel free to leave a comment down below, and if you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to like and subscribe. If there is something like this that you would like me to cover on the channel in the future, let me know and I would be happy to do so.